Hi everyone, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Bina Ahmad. I am a criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, New York, currently practicing as a public defender. I've also practiced international human rights law, animal rights law, and what many of us radical lawyers would call social justice or movement lawyering. And today I'll be giving you a Know Your Rights training. First, I want to thank the U.S. campaign for inviting me to give this training and for giving me a home in this movement and in this struggle. And thank you to all of you for tuning in and for trusting me to teach you your rights, to fight for your rights in court, and for standing in solidarity with me and with each other in these struggles. So I'd like to just quickly lay out what I plan to cover today, and then we'll just jump right in. So I plan to cover just the political framing of this training and why I frame it in the way that I do, calling it a radical Know Your Rights training and what that means. And then I'd to go into the substance of the training, which is the first part would be encountering known law enforcement on the street or in your home. So whenever you encounter law enforcement that you can identify as law enforcement, they're wearing their uniform, they have NYPD or FBI insignia on their clothing, on their badges, and you can tell or they identify themselves as law enforcement or as state agents. Then the next section will be covering whether you think you have someone in your mix who could be law enforcement, but you don't know, and they're not disclosing that they are. So somebody who could be an undercover or agent provocateur and infiltrating your group, and what to do in that sensitive situation. And then I'd like to close with solidarity with those that are facing state repression and how best to give, or what many of us think is the best way to give solidarity to those facing state repression in the courts when they're facing prosecution and criminal charges, and the best way to sort of approach those situations. So with that, I'd like to jump right in. I know I won't be able to cover everything today, but those are the main sections, and I'll be giving you resources at the end, and you can also reach out to me for further follow-up and for further questions. So let's just start with a brief overview of what I'm talking about in this training and why I'm calling it a radical Know Your Rights training. So I call it a radical Know Your Rights training as I don't want to just teach you your rights, but I want to teach you the political framing behind why we even have to do these trainings, and what I hope to accomplish with them, and who's really at the center of a lot of this state repression, and why that needs to be the focus. So policing in this country started with runaway slave patrols to capture runaway slaves. And, that sort of set, of course, the tone for just the path and the arc of policing throughout the history of these United States of America, and that policing is meant to maintain the status quo and to protect those in power and keep them in power. And the system that we have, which is a white supremacist capitalist system, then uses police as an armed branch to enforce their system of white supremacist capitalism. And we see its results. And so the system is not quote unquote broken. It's operating exactly how it was designed to operate. And so, myself and other radical lawyers, wanted to learn this language of power of the law to try to arm communities with how to protect themselves from these systems in the best way that they can and that we can help teach them. It's not bulletproof. It will not often stop, everything or, completely prevent an arrest or a violation of your rights or something else, but hopefully can minimize harm. But it in no way is, meant for us lawyers to be saying that we agree with these laws that we have to teach you. Many of us don't, I don't, but that we had to learn this system that we were forced to live under in order to try to protect ourselves. So I in no way am telling you that this is what I think you politically should do, or that I agree with these laws. I just am here to teach you what they are and how to protect yourself and your communities. And so another part of this training is framing it in that radical political framework, in that we want to focus on the most vulnerable and most targeted communities. So Black and brown communities, our undocumented communities, our trans community and LGBTQI community, and those facing historically and currently the most state repression. And the reason for that is that the way that your rights are sort of applied and the way that you are able to interact with law enforcement very much depends on who you are, how you present, and the privilege that you carry. And that if you are a white cisgendered male citizen and normative and heterosexual presenting, you're going to have a much easier time interacting with law enforcement. They're going to be much more lenient, and you're going to get away with a lot and have little to no or very mild consequences compared to someone who's from the Black community, who's trans, who's undocumented, people who are not sort of meant to be protected by the system and actually meant to be targeted. So I want our trainings to really focus on the fact that that's a reality. And so our rights can be things, just in writing, but then the way that they're applied very much matters on who you are and how you represent. So that's why it's really important to have a radical political framing in our trainings and focusing on the most vulnerable. And also part of radical lawyering and radical social justice movements is that we want to have collective responsibility. And that idea of collective responsibility, collectively protecting each other, taking care of each other, being responsible to each other will come up throughout this training. And it's not just because it's warm and fuzzy or it's what we politically and morally should do, support each other, but also legally it is the strongest way to protect ourselves and to keep ourselves safe and our communities safe. So, so that's the framing within which I give these trainings, and particularly to radical political groups and organizations and movements who are also historically targeted, and of course currently more so. I hope that these trainings provide you with tools to fight back and to push back, while also centering, those historically marginalized and targeted communities. So, with that, why don't we get right into the training and sort of what I'm talking about. So the first section that I had wanted to just start with was what to do when you think you're or you are encountering law enforcement in your community. And a lot of that I'm going to teach you right now are things that you can take care of beforehand. Many things that I want you to take care of. Whether you're going to a demonstration or just living your everyday life. As we know, our Black and brown communities, just everyday life, you're going to be encountering law enforcement more than our white, and upper to middle class communities. So you want to get ready and stay ready for, a time or any time that you could be encountering law enforcement. So take care of everything and get ready as if you are going to encounter law enforcement every day. So the first is that you want to memorize one phone number, at least, if you can, that you can call who's an emergency contact. And, or if you're going to a march or a protest, you can write that number and permanent marker on your arm. And the reason is that many people don't dial numbers anymore. You don't know who to call if there's an emergency situation, if you're arrested, and you want to have one person that you can turn to and you can tell you've been taken into custody. And you want that person then to also be armed with information to help you. So that person should know if you have animals at home that need to be fed, how to contact your landlord if they need to get into your apartment, if you have children that need to be picked up, if they need to call your boss and let them know you're not coming in today. You want that person to be able to do those things for you. You also want that person to know any sensitive medical information or health issues that you're struggling with that you need to have taken care of. So, if you are diabetic, HIV positive, you have some other health issue that's very urgent that has, sort of daily caretaking in it, you want at least one person on the outside to know that so that they can help advocate for you. At least they know to monitor what's happening and that if you're in for a certain amount of time, you're going to need medical attention. And the medical, issue thing is something that you also should take care of. So, carrying with you if you need urgent medication at all times, just carrying it on you, and carrying it in your original pharmacy issued container that has what the medication is, who prescribed it, because in many states like New York, that's actually the law. You have to carry your prescription meds in their original pharmacy container, but it also helps verify and validate the medical issues you have if for some reason you're not able to communicate that when you might be interacting with law enforcement. So, and another thing is to practice good security culture. Put a numerical lock on your phone. Even though officers need a warrant to go through your phone, we often know they do sort of whatever they want to do, right? And so you want to make sure that you protect your phone, because if you have a smartphone, like most people, everything in your life is there. And so you want to make sure that you're protecting that, because you're not only protecting yourself, but then you're protecting your contacts in your phone, your community, the emails you have with people, all of that's in there. You want to protect others as well and be responsible and accountable to them. Just a sort of thumbprint lock where you can put your thumbprint on the phone is not enough to protect your phone. Officers can force you to put your thumbprint on your phone to open it. So putting a numerical lock protects you from that. Another thing, we're talking about what you carry on you, and, putting a lock on your phone and carrying, your medication carefully. Don't carry anything that you don't want to end up in the hands of the police. Because if you're arrested, whatever you have on you will eventually be searched, gone through, and the police will have access to it. So, things that hopefully, might be obvious, like don't carry weapons, don't carry drugs on you, no, organizing plans, on you, if anybody handwrites those anymore, no fake IDs. That can be considered lying to law enforcement. If you have a fake ID, say you're somebody else when you're not. No cash over $100. Oftentimes, especially in New York, if you have anything over 100, that will be, kept and inventoried. You might have a hard time getting that back. So you just, want to be careful with everything you have on you. Another thing is you want to clear any warrants that you have in any jurisdiction. So, anything as small, particularly in New York, such as if you were riding your bike on the sidewalk and you got a summons, which is a pink summons, and you were supposed to pay a fine or whatnot or go to court and you didn't go, that means that you now have a warrant out for your arrest. And if you are arrested later, if you have an open warrant, the officers are not able to be, quote unquote, lenient on you and release you early from the precinct because you have an open warrant. They have to put you fully through the system to process that. It takes a long time. It's brutal. So, if you ever did not answer a summons, if you missed a court date, if you didn't pay all your fines, if you had a court case, anything of that nature, or you didn't complete your community service, you probably have a warrant for your arrest, and you want to take care of that now, so that doesn't come up later when it can be easily taken care of before. And especially out of state, anything in a foreign jurisdiction is a very long, brutal, complicated process where you're essentially just held in jail, picked up by that other state, and driven even across country to take care of that warrant. So taking care of all of your court obligations is a huge, huge thing you can do that will make your life a lot easier if you ever are, taken into custody. And then particularly if you are, going to demonstrations, be aware of, that your speech and the things that you say are not just, they're not just about you. Again, collective responsibility. Often they are, what you say can be attributed to the group you're marching with, or protesting with, or who you even work for, if you work for, a political organization or even not. What you say can bleed over into your group and not just impact you. And you may have risks you can take that others don't. So you want to be very mindful of the things that you do and say when you're out protesting and engaging in political speech, and be accountable to other folks. You also might want to train someone to be a legal observer and to request a legal observer, and someone who doesn't participate and just monitors what happens and tracks arrests if people are arrested. You can also have that person or another person be trained just to be a videographer or a cop watcher, where they just videotape what happens and if there are arrests. So you are legally allowed to film the police at any point on the street or in public. And of course they don't like it, but you are legally allowed to do that. You have the right to do that. People have rights and police have power. So you have the right to do that. But you want to do it safely, from a safe distance. You don't want to physically interfere. You don't want to start agitating the cops and yelling at them or swearing at them while they're arresting someone, as that could potentially make it worse on the person that they're arresting. It could also end up getting you arrested, especially if you're getting physically in the way or interfering in some way. And then it also risks that, the officer is destroying your footage, or you dropping your phone, and then everything you were filming is lost. So, and then if you are, filming or you see something happening, you want to be careful and not just post it right away online. Because once you post something online, it's there forever, accessible to everyone. And, you don't know that whatever you capture, something in the background you didn't mean to capture now, is out there with someone on, the video who didn't know they're being videotaped is out there. And you also want to check in with the person whose arrest you were filming. And if they, want that out there, if their arrest was brutal, if they want that out in the public, they might, have other sensitive issues. Like they might, be trans or queer and not be out to their family. And now, and that's out there on the video. If they, were able to live their life normally and free, at these protests. And now that's sort of videotaped and broadcast to the world that they may not have wanted. And you also just want to check in with that person's defense attorney if that person ended up fully getting arrested, because, I, as a defense attorney, would like to see that and like to know what's going on with that video and not learn about it, from YouTube. I'd rather learn about it first and see what it is concerning my client. Also at protests, you want to operate on a buddy system. You want to have that planned already. You want to check in and out with somebody so that in case you guys lose track of each other, it's not that, oh, I just thought that person maybe went home. What if that person was arrested and you don't know? You want to know that you check out with that person and you know that they're okay, and have that plan in place before you hit the streets. And then that buddy, system person can also be your emergency contact or know your emergency contact and be able to put those things in motion. Also things like, and I hate to even politically say this, but being polite to officers goes a long way. And it's brutal and grotesque to have to even say that when absolute outrage at officers in the police state and what they do to our communities is completely valid and absolutely warranted. But trying to get out of these situations with law enforcement safely and quickly, being polite can go a long way. Being calm, keeping your hands where they can see them, things that just don't escalate the situation, because it can escalate for you and it can escalate for other people. So trying to, practice keeping your calm in that situation. And the other thing that you really want to take care of is, probably more like, the core of all this is that you want to have your politics in check, right? Before you are, protesting, before you're politically engaging, and, just in general, before you might ever interact with law enforcement, because you want to make sure that you're not, especially if you're not from the targeted communities, you're not making things worse for them, right? So you want to make sure that you're centering those who are most vulnerable. If you're going to Movement for Black Lives March, you are a white solidarity activist, you don't want to be suddenly, if the march was meant to just be like calm and, obviously defer to the community who's leading it, you don't want to be somebody who's then doing something that wasn't agreed upon. Perhaps now you are escalating things by the way that you're speaking or what you're doing. You go up to officers and maybe antagonize them, and that's not what the community wanted at the time, or they didn't feel safe doing that. And you can take that risk, but you've also now escalated the risk for everyone else, as the officers might see you and think that's the tenor of the whole group, or they get tense in general and they don't know how things are going to spin out of control. And so they start to treat everyone or look at everyone in that light now that you might have done something. And, this particularly was cemented for me when I lived in Palestine. I'm not Palestinian. I'm a Muslim woman of color, but I'm a U.S. citizen, and I'm a U.S.-born U.S. citizen. And going through checkpoints was really enraging and disgusting to witness. And of course, I would want to mouth off to the soldiers, but I had to stop myself knowing that I'm not Palestinian and that I could say something and not pay the consequence for it as heavily as the Palestinians behind me, because I'm a U.S. citizen and I don't have to live there. But if I angered the soldiers, the people who would suffer with their anger would be the Palestinians they could take that anger out on. And I had to be accountable, of course, to those communities. So just keeping that example in mind of what it really means to center our most targeted communities. And we want to think collectively about when we interact with law enforcement or just in general, because things that we do, we might think, well, I have nothing to hide, I haven't done anything wrong, but we have no idea how things can be interpreted and how things can be built against another community based on things that we say, even harmless things that we say. And I'll get more into that later in the training. But, practicing also stepping up, stepping back, things like that will go a long way in terms of having our strong communities there to protect ourselves and then collectively push back against state power. And so, on a lot of this training, when you are interacting with law enforcement, is also based on the rule that you want to minimize your contact with law enforcement. And essentially, us lawyers would advise that you do not talk to law enforcement without an attorney present. So, why is that? Like I mentioned just now that, some people might think I have nothing to hide, I didn't do anything wrong, or I'm not even saying that my friend that they might be asking me about did something. I'm just telling them my friend's a good person and they are an activist with this movement. The problems with talking to law enforcement substantively without a lawyer is that, for one thing, you don't know what they know. You have no idea if they're approaching you on the street just because they saw you for the first time and thought you might have done something, or that they, might be pretending they're just, hearing of you and meeting you, but have been maybe surveilling you and watching you for a year or two, or your community or your family or your organization. So you have no idea if they're building a case against you or your movement. And if you give political information, if you give information about your colleagues, even harmless information, you have no idea how that can be used against them when you thought maybe you were just saying something good about them and defending them to law enforcement. And you don't know who or what they're investigating. And that could be you, could again be your organization or your family. And innocent information can perhaps help their investigation or their case they might be building against you or someone else you care about. And you also don't know the laws in the books. There are thousands of laws, and they're different by state, and then by state and then federal laws. So if you don't know all the laws on the books, and most attorneys don't know, how do you know if something you're saying may or may not be a crime? Many people in New York don't know or didn't know, until many campaigns recently, that jumping the turnstile or not paying for the subway is a misdemeanor, punishable by up to a year in prison. So there are many things that people don't know are crimes. And so then why would you want to be talking if you don't know things you might be doing, you may not even know could be perhaps interpreted as criminal activity. So you don't know what could incriminate you or somebody else. You also want to have a witness there if you talk to law enforcement, like your lawyer, who can also push back against that imbalance of power with the state. It's also important to know that police can legally lie to you to get you to talk or to investigate their cases. So they're allowed to fudge the truth or lie and to say things like we see on TV every day, like, oh, your friend is in the room next door. They already told me everything that happened, and if you just tell me to, I will tell the judge to go easy on you, and they'll let you go. Now that is a complete lie. It's a lie because they can say that. They can say they talked to somebody when they didn't. But it's also a lie in that officers don't have any influence over what the judge will do or even what charges, really, you're going to end up being charged with. That's up to the DA. And it's really up to the judge what they're going to do in terms of bail or whatnot. So that they have no control over. But we see these stories every day in arraignment or hear them, and it's heartbreaking because it happens every day. But on the flip side, it is and can be in many ways a crime for you to lie to law enforcement. So it can be many different state crimes. If you lie about your name, if you lie saying you saw somebody run this way when they were looking for that person and they ran the other way, that's a number of different state crimes you could be charged with. It's also a federal crime to lie to a federal agent. Any small white lie to a federal agent is a crime punishable by several years in federal prison. And the way that works is, many people might give a white lie when they're scared and encountering a federal agent. But then the way that that's used is oftentimes that threat of prosecution is hanging over people's heads, and that's used to flip people and get them to inform on their communities. So it's incredibly important for you to minimize your contact, not be talking to law enforcement without a lawyer, with all of these risks up in the balance. So, with all these things then that I want you to take care of before you ever could encounter law enforcement, whether it's if you're from a targeted community, a state targeted community, where you're a part of a radical political movement that of course is going to be targeted by our state, or you're a political organizer, you want to handle all those things because that will go about 90% of the way in protecting your rights and having shielded you from many consequences when and if you actually do encounter law enforcement on the street or in your home. So let's go on now to when you actually will encounter law enforcement, what happens on the street. Let's start with the street. So oftentimes when people are demonstrating, that's the first time or first way that you might interact with law enforcement. They're there, or if of course you're living in a state targeted community, you're part of the Black and brown community, particularly in New York. So when officers are on the street, just be mindful in general if you can, get their badge numbers, their names, things like that. Just constantly be looking for that if and when you do encounter law enforcement, or think you might. So officers have the power, and I really want to be careful with my language. The state has power, people have rights. So officers have the power to approach you on the street at almost any time. And that approach, and the way I'm going to teach it to you, is going to be a linear, sort of chronological encounter. That first initial approach is we're going to call the conversation stage. That's the first interaction that you're going to have with law enforcement on the street. So they can stop you on the street and try to speak to you. You are never obligated to speak to law enforcement without a lawyer, really, substantively about yourself or anything that you did. And at this stage, the conversation stage, you're not obligated to stay. But what we do recommend is that people answer non-incriminating biographical information that can hopefully get you out of the encounter safely. So again, minimizing the contact with law enforcement, keeping your answers short to 5 words or less so that you don't ramble on, but answering, basic non-incriminating questions so that you can perhaps get out of the situation, de-escalate it, rather than, risking arrest and having to go through the system. So, if officers then stop you on the street, and, ask you something like, okay, well, what's your name? Excuse me, can I talk to you? Where are you going? What we recommend is you answer these basic non-incriminating questions politely, but with short, answers, 5 words or less, never touching an officer, keeping your hands where they can see them and whatnot. But after you answer those basic questions, so let's say you say, oh, my name's Bina, I'm going home. Each was 3 words, right? Immediately you ask or say the first set of magic words, right? These words that I'm teaching you that will hopefully protect you and minimize the harm encountering law enforcement. So the first set is, am I free to leave? Am I free to leave? So if they ask you, oh, excuse me, can I talk to you for a second? What's your name? Oh, my name's Bina. Where are you going? I'm going home. Am I free to leave? Am I free to leave? Okay, that's the first set of magic words. They're not, again, bulletproof. They often won't completely stop the encounter. This isn't meant to be sort of legal advice, as every situation is different. But the general platform of this is, with the conversation stage, am I free to leave, right? It's a polite way of saying, okay, I've answered your basic questions. Am I free to leave? So if they say, yeah, okay, you're free to leave, just calmly walk away. For our purposes, we're going to assume that they say, no, you're not free to leave. So now this means that you are at the next elevated level of the encounter, which is the detention phase, right? So now you still don't have to talk substantively about yourself or your movement, but you do now have to stay because they said you're not free to leave. But right after they say, okay, no, you're not free to leave, the very next set of magic words that you should say and that you should ask are, oh, okay, well, are you detaining me? Are you detaining me? And it's checking now, okay, well, am I actually now being detained? Am I in the detention phase of this encounter? For our purposes, we're going to assume that they will say yes, because if they say that you're not free to leave, you are likely being detained. So if they say yes, you can ask why. They likely will not tell you or, may not answer you at all or give you some, answer that doesn't make sense perhaps. But regardless of whether they tell you or whatnot, after they inform you you are now being detained, the very next set of magic words and thing that you should say is, I wish to remain silent. I wish to remain silent. Now, what that communicates is that the main purpose of detentions is to further investigate a situation, whether it's police heard of a crime in the area or they want to investigate you and the protests, that you're leaving. But what you want to communicate is, okay, well, you have detained me, but you're not getting any more information from me. I'm not talking. I'm not going to help you with this investigation. I'm just going to remain silent. So your detention will be useless. So that's the purpose of saying, I wish to remain silent. Now, at this point, and, in general, like I said, try to always be aware of your surroundings and officers' badge, numbers and names and whatnot. But in general, just try to be you're now being detained, become aware of where you are, what street corner you're on. If you are in front of a deli where there may be a video and we could get that video to show what happened, if there are witnesses walking by, you want to make sure that you are sort of becoming your own recorder and something that you can then later tell your defense attorney, what happened. And that you're saying each of these phrases, these magic words, loudly and calmly so that if there are witnesses or video that they could capture you saying that. So another thing is that, within this detention phase now where we asked, are we being detained? They said yes, and we said, okay, you don't tell me why. They don't say anything. Then we say, okay, well, I wish to remain silent. This is where a pat down or a frisk can come. So officers have the power, not the right, to pat you down to feel for weapons. They're supposed to only pat you down on the outer parts of your clothing to feel for hard metal objects. It's for their quote-unquote safety, but they have the power to do it. And so what we recommend is that you don't physically resist, as that can quickly escalate into violence for you, and it can end very badly. But so you physically comply. They say put your arms out, put your arms out. But at the same time, you protect your legal rights, and you say the next set of magic words, which is, I do not consent to this search. I do not consent to this search. And keep repeating it as they're patting you down. It might seem counterintuitive. And then if they do try to go into your backpack or to your pockets or whatnot, where they don't feel a hard metal object, keep repeating, I do not consent to this search. They technically shouldn't be going into a backpack, but that's later for your attorney to fight. You just keep invoking your rights. If you don't say anything when they're patting you down and searching you, or if they ask you, can I pat you down, and you say, sure, you have consented to the search. So it's very important that you say, I do not consent to this search. Now, at this point in the interaction is where an arrest could come in, right? So officers could arrest you. They could, think that they, for whatever really reason, but it's supposed to be that they have probable cause that you committed a crime, some kind of crime, that they believe you committed. And you'll know you're arrested by them either putting you in the squad car, by cuffing you, or them telling you you're under arrest. The most important thing to know is that oftentimes, particularly in New York, when people are arrested, officers don't often read them their Miranda rights anymore. So hopefully folks know what your Miranda rights are. Your Miranda rights are read to you as you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, the court will provide one for you. So they often don't read you these rights. Sometimes they read them to you later when they try to interrogate you at the precinct. But whether they read you your rights or not, your Miranda rights apply the minute you are arrested. So whether they read them to you or not, you need to immediately say the last set of magic words, which is, I'm not talking without my lawyer. I'm not talking without my lawyer. And that phrase and emphasizing something about not talking and wanting a lawyer, those two things together are very important, because one, saying I'm not talking is invoking your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and without my lawyer is invoking your Sixth Amendment right to counsel. And they have to go together, because if you just say I'm not talking, courts say that cops can wait for a reasonable period of time to try to re-pressure you and re-interrogate you. And oftentimes people succumb to that pressure after a while. So you want to make sure that you say I'm not talking without my lawyer, because then technically they're not supposed to even try to question you until your attorney is present. Oftentimes they'll try, but just keep repeating this phrase. Later, if they try to interrogate you in the precinct, they try to get you to sign a Miranda waiver form in the precinct. Do not sign that form. Don't sign anything except for, what's called in New York a desk appearance ticket slip, which is a release from the precinct early without having to be held through the system. And just keep repeating that phrase. Now, oftentimes these interactions are going to go many different ways. They're going to go out of order. They may not be as polite. Officers might just come up and throw you against a wall and search you. It's up to you to adapt these words and use your common sense and your best judgment in every situation, as every situation is different. Now, when you're in custody, after you're arrested, know that all calls are going to be recorded from the precinct or from jail that you make, except to your lawyer for legal advice. So be very careful and short about what you say to friends and family on the phone. You can just let them know you're okay, what precinct you're at and things like that. Don't talk about your organizing. Don't talk about, of course, like what happened in terms of what you might have done that got you arrested, if you did anything, things of that nature, okay? And one thing that I also wanted to mention is that in terms of things that you want to just keep in mind in general when you're out in the street, whether you're protesting part of a movement or part of a state-targeted community, you want to be particularly careful interacting with law enforcement or in any way if you are, of course, not a U.S. citizen, even if you have lawful status, but particularly if you are undocumented, especially in this day and age. Also, if you are on probation or parole, if you have open criminal cases, if you have a criminal record, these things can make it a much more penalizing for interacting with law enforcement. So any arrest can violate you on probation or parole, even if it's an unlawful arrest. Any contact, if you're undocumented, can alert immigration. So you want to be particularly careful, not only if you are somebody of a very vulnerable category when you are living in the world and interacting with law enforcement, but as a solidarity activist, you also want to make sure that you center those who have, again, like I said, the most to risk, right? Again, collective responsibility. Those who cannot risk any police contact, like our undocumented community or those on probation or parole, or have open cases or whatnot. So you want to know that you could face extra charges, you could face collateral consequences as a result of interacting with law enforcement if you're part of those categories. So just keeping that in mind. At this point then, when you're taken into custody, like I said, calls can be recorded. In New York, you are eligible to be released with a desk appearance ticket slip if officers choose to, if you don't have any open warrants. So, like going back to what I said about clearing your warrants, this goes a long way. And what this means is you won't be held through the system and forced to see the judge all in one day or night. You can be allowed to go home, and you don't have to stay in jail until you see the judge. You can go home, come back later for an arraignment, on the day that they tell you. And many jurisdictions allow this, but they, don't allow it, of course, or they're not allowed to let you go from the precinct if you have an open warrant, right? Also having, had a criminal record or criminal history or open cases can lead the officers to use their discretion to hold you in and put you fully through the system. In New York, arraignments should happen within 24 hours. Many other places it can be longer. So just keeping that in mind, that being arrested can be a lengthy process, and of course it can be extremely brutal. So that's, of course, encounters on the street, right, or with law enforcement and who you can identify as law enforcement. So what about if law enforcement comes to your home? Right? And this often happens with, activist communities, radical political communities, with the Muslim community. They've been facing visits by the FBI for a long time. And, there are many reasons why law enforcement might come to your home. They might come because they have, reason to believe there's a crime committed, and they might have warrants, and we'll get into that. Or they're just coming to surveil the community, right? And to get information from people and to just gather intelligence and, about a certain family or about a certain mosque or a certain movement. And, there are many reasons why, or just as a tactic of intimidation. But for, whatever these reasons, again, keeping in mind collective responsibility, and that we are accountable to everyone, not just ourselves and our movement. We want to keep those same principles of minimizing our contact with law enforcement on the street. It's the same as, minimizing our contact if they come to our home, and to protecting each other. So, if the FBI or, local police come to your home, and if you hear or see that they're there through the peephole, you hear that they announce, they knock, and they say it's FBI, open up, or NYPD, the first thing is that you just always keep the door closed first. Don't just immediately open the door. If they knock, if they give you a chance to answer, they're not, if they're not blowing your door open with a battering ram, which can happen, but if they're actually knocking or ringing your doorbell, keep the door closed. You can ask what they want. Let's say, for instance, just say they want to talk to you. They might say, oh, this is just routine. Oh, this is just harmless. Or we think there's something going on in the area. There's a missing child reported. All these examples I'm using are from true stories either that I've heard or that I've represented. So, in these scenarios where officers are just doing these visits or wanting to talk to you, what you should say is, okay, well, I have nothing to say to you. Slide your card under the door, and I will have my lawyer contact you. So what that does is one, you get the information of who they are, and you're keeping the door closed. You're protecting your home where all your private stuff is, not just for you, but your roommate or your family. And you're telling them, okay, well, I'll have my lawyer contact you, which means myself or the lawyer will then call them and let them know that, well, I'm invoking my client's right to counsel. You can't go back there without a warrant or without going through me. So it can often stop the visit, and they'll often come back many times to different communities and different homes. So, so that's if they're just coming and they want to talk to you, right? Now, if they say, open up, we have a warrant. Open up, we have, let's say, a search warrant. We'll start, there's two different types of warrants. There's a search warrant and an arrest warrant. Starting with a search warrant, if they say, okay, open up, we have a search warrant. What, again, you should do, keeping the door closed, right? The door is still closed. You should say, slide the search warrant under the door, and I want to take a look at it. The reason for that is you want to actually make sure it's a search warrant, that it's a valid warrant, it's for the right address. Oftentimes, the officers will come to the wrong address, and that it's signed by a judge. It has to be signed by a judge to be a valid warrant. Now, if it is a valid search warrant, you have to let them in legally. But you can, again, apply the same principles we were talking about before of observing. You can film if the officers will let you. Sometimes they might, get angry and threaten you. They don't like to be filmed. It's up to you to use your judgment if you're home alone. Oftentimes they come very, very early in the morning, or many people are still sleeping, their neighbors or family. So, it's up to you. If they get angry and tell you to sit there and not move, you probably should consider complying with that, but you can still film from where you're sitting or taking notes, and just, keeping an eye on what's happening. So, that's the search warrant, right? And it's important to let roommates and family that you live with know about, these rules in general, because roommates can consent to a search of the common areas of your apartment, even if you're not home, and family members can consent to a search of the entire home, even your private areas, when you're even not home, because they're family. And so you want to make sure that people know to protect each other, collective responsibility, and protecting your home, where so much of your private information is, and probably everything. So that's the search warrant. So let's say that they have an arrest warrant. And they say, okay, we have an arrest warrant for this person. Again, have them slide the warrant. The door is closed. Have it slide under the door and take a look at it. Make sure it's, again, the right address. And if that person is there who's on that warrant, what we recommend is that that person step outside and give themselves up. Now, the reason for that is that if you let the officers in to seize that person, they only had an arrest warrant originally, but now once they're in, it's very hard to get them out and to stop them from going into all the areas of their home. So basically, they can just exercise a de facto search warrant when they really only had an arrest warrant because you let them in. So you want to protect your home at all times, and that having that person step out and surrender, then you protect your home and you still comply with the warrant, because if it's a valid warrant, you legally have to comply. And the reason sort of with the keeping the door closed and not wanting them to come into your house is that, not only does your home have all private things, right, of your life, but again, going back to what I said about, you don't know what they're investigating, what they already know, if it's even you they're investigating or your movements, and you don't know what could incriminate you or somebody else. So oftentimes FBI or NYPD would be and still do visit the Muslim community, and if they, somebody opens the door, and they will peek inside or even just come right in. If the door opens, they'll just force their way in. And they see Qur'ans on the wall, or Arabic writing, or a Free Palestine poster, or you see my Che poster behind me. They can use that to obviously get more information about your politics, right? And who you are, that you're a Muslim, okay, you're practicing. Things like that, is that you don't know what kind of case they're building. And again, if they ask you about your friend, what is your friend like? Are they a criminal or whatnot? You answering basic, innocent questions, defending them, saying, no, they're not. They go to this mosque and they're very giving in this mosque, and they volunteer at this school, and they work here or whatnot. Trying to defend your friend. Well, you've also given officers a lot of information about your friend or community member, where they work, their politics, and again, you don't know what kind of case or information they have or how they can use it against someone. And it's amazing how seemingly innocent information can be used and twisted against someone in a criminal case. So you want to protect yourself and your community and your home and all of the organizing that we're doing by minimizing your contact, minimizing law enforcement knowing about your life, being in your home, things like that. Warrants can also be, I mentioned a battering ram. They can be no-knock warrants where, especially for drug cases, where law enforcement will say that they're afraid someone's going to flush the drugs on the toilet when they knock, so they're allowed to come at 5 in the morning with a battering ram and blow your front door open. And again, that happens, and that's something we will try to, of course, fight against, but just to know it's not always going to go the way that I'm teaching you. So, with that, that's if, so those are the encounters of, when you might see law enforcement on the street, they're law enforcement, or at your home. They either are wearing insignia of law enforcement, NYPD, FBI, or they identify themselves as law enforcement. Those are the ways that, we can try to protect ourselves and push back. There are many areas, where I'd love to cover, and we'll save that for another day, about rights at airports, or obviously immigration issues, but those we'll save for another day, particularly for immigration. If you are someone who's not a U.S. citizen and you have interaction with law enforcement, it's really important to contact a lawyer right away. And particularly in general, if you have a home visit from NYPD, FBI, or some other state agent, getting their card is very important because you want to call a lawyer right away, regardless of your status, because you want that lawyer to, one, invoke your rights to counsel, but also figure out what the heck is going on, and try to find out if they're, what kind of case they're building, what agency they're from, and it's important for us to be able to do that for you. So getting that information is extremely important, and calling a lawyer right away then is extremely important. So let's move on now to if you think you have someone in your mix who could be law enforcement, but you don't know. So they could be an undercover, they could be an infiltrator or agent provocateur, and what that is. So this section is extremely sensitive, and I always hesitate to talk about it because it can, and know your rights trainings in general can scare people, and this section can make people particularly overly paranoid about other community members, and make people not want to trust each other and to stop organizing. That's the most dangerous thing you can do, but it's often a natural reaction to first learning this information. But hopefully by learning it, us talking about it, coming up with a community plan, it arms you with something to do, and it then shows you that you need to keep doing. You need to keep organizing and moving. So, undercovers and infiltrators have been used throughout history, particularly in state-targeted communities and politically radical communities, to break up those movements, to infiltrate them, to entrap people into plots, into plots of agreeing to commit crimes, to not trusting each other anymore, and really breaking up organizing that's threatening state power. It's been used against the Black Panthers and the American Indian movement, and many other radical movements. So, and it's still being used today, and it's been used particularly within, the radical left and within the Muslim community. So, there are certain indicia of agent provocateurs that fit a certain profile, and, I'll talk about them, but it's important to know that a lot of these things taken separately can be good things, like generosity or somebody being new to the community, but put together, they fit a profile of someone who, of agents that we've seen in the past that have fit this profile. And it's also really about a gut feeling that something just doesn't feel right. And it's really, going back to talking about using your judgment. Something doesn't feel right. And this also goes back to if you have tight communities and we all are taking care of each other and working together and we know each other and we're not just people who work together on a march once in a while, but we actually are collectively supporting each other. We will know each other well enough and have a tight enough group that you are going to be so hard to infiltrate that you will then be sort of protecting each other and putting this, field, force field around you. So, that is very important to form in general. I'm going to read now the indicia of the agent provocateurs, but it's really just important to know, again, not to be overly suspicious of each other. So, what we found is that agents will often have, for instance, a lack of history in a community. No one knows their family, particularly in immigrant communities. Everyone knows someone who knows someone who knows their aunt. Not someone, a way to verify or just know who people are. But with this person, nobody really knows their family, where they came from. They have a sort of unstable job or work history or education history. You don't really know where they work or where they have worked. They don't really name a company or where they went to school. They don't really say where they went to school. They just say, I went to school out east, and not when. So, you can't then really verify that person was enrolled in that school then. They'll also have a lot of available money and be very generous with that money, want to give gifts to people and form friendships really quickly and be very giving and pulling people in that way. But, then the money doesn't really seem to have a valid source. They don't really talk about having a well-paying job, or it doesn't seem like they have wealthy family member or come from money, that they would just have available money like that. And they're available at odd times of the day when they would be working to have that money. Their politics sometimes don't make any sense. They're very really extreme and inflammatory and radical to the point of being very dangerous. We're talking about armed struggle, suddenly just coming into a space and talking about that, and that we need to take things to the next level, and we're not doing enough. And that often can then cajole vulnerable people, even mentally ill people, to be vulnerable to being friends with these people and then being pulled into agreements to commit these crimes, and then they can be charged with federal conspiracy. They also create messes between people, conflict and division between people, and try to isolate people. So this goes back to our sort of like cohesion of protecting each other, and that if you don't have a tight group and don't really work together well or protect each other very well, you have a socially marginalized person or isolated person or someone who might be just a little off or mentally ill, who's a much easier target then for that person to take under their wing and eventually try to cajole into their plot. Their talk is very provocative and whatnot, and like I said, they target a lot of weak and vulnerable people and communities. So taken together, those things often sort of fit a general profile, and it's not just the separate things like someone being new to the community. Okay, that's okay, or someone being generous is a good thing, but taken together, it fits a certain profile that has been used in the past. But like I said, it's very important to not be overly suspicious of each other, and it's important to know that if you really think this is happening, you should talk to those you have known for a long time and trust. And if they verify the same kind of feeling, you should talk to a lawyer and go to a lawyer and speak to them about what you're experiencing, and not immediately blow this up on social media. It can also get you in more trouble if you sort of blow a cover of someone who might be an agent. And it also then could be extremely hurtful and damaging if you are wrong. Right? And then you accuse someone who's not, and then that can sort of destroy the fabric. Because the risks of the undercovers and they're sort of getting people to agree to plots is that, one, of course, it's someone being prosecuted now in federal court for crimes that they never really intended to do without being cajoled for years by an undercover. But also then it breaks the fabric of the community because people now don't trust each other, right? And it really breaks up your organizing. No one wants to come together anymore because they're afraid of that happening again, and they don't know who else they could trust anymore. So it's really important to be very careful, but to also be very sharp. Document things that are odd that you think are happening and that are making you nervous. And contacting an attorney if this is something you think is happening. So that's the section on sort of dealing with undercovers, agent provocateurs, very quickly and generally. And again, just keeping that, I want to be very sensitive about that, and that you should really talk to each other and then to a lawyer about this. So, the final section, and there's so many other things I'd love to cover, and we'll save it for another time, like conspiracy and material support, which is a federal statute used against the Muslim community mostly. But, for time's sake, I would really want to move on then to the final section about court solidarity and movement solidarity, with those facing state repression in the form of charges. So, when people are facing criminal charges, it's often a very good impulse, but a very quick one for the movement or for the community to form support communities, or support committees around these cases and protect and advocate for those facing state repression. But often what happens is there's a breakdown in the communication where there's not communication perhaps with the attorney who's defending that person, or even with the person facing charges and what kind of solidarity they want or what kind of solidarity is safe for them. And so, things that have happened in the past is that movement solidarity committees have sometimes done things that have actually harmed the case for that person because they didn't check with the attorney with that person and they didn't quite know, of course, everything that's happening in the case. So we want to at the same time understand that it really is also about the movement, because we know these cases are meant to send a message. When we see prosecutions of activists or of Muslims, of course, every day our Black and brown communities going through the criminal system are meant to send a message. But we want to make sure then we also center those actually facing those charges, because they're the ones facing time. And we want to actually make sure that they're the center of these decisions that we make, and the way that we advocate around their case. And centering that, the most vulnerable, again, like I keep saying, and being collectively responsible to each other. That it's not just about one person. It's not that, you want to say something, or you have a big heart and want to do something. Is that it's about the collective. So, the general message, of this training is about collective solidarity and supporting each other, minimizing your contact with law enforcement because you don't know what they know, things that could harm your community in ways you never thought, or harm you or your family, and continually protecting the community by not only minimizing your contact, but keeping, your movements and solidarity tight, fighting division within our movements, and making sure that we're constantly ready and staying ready and we're on our game. Because a lot of the stuff that I can tell you, they're legal rights, but so much of it is grounded in the politics and the organizing that we do, and the way that we support and love each other and lift each other up. So, and I hope that this training hasn't terrified people to be like, oh my God, forget it, I'm staying home. I don't want to do anything anymore, because that's the most dangerous thing that you can do. Because when you stop organizing, when you just stay home and you just say, forget it, I don't want to do anything anymore, you're more isolated. You're not talking to your community or the organizers anymore, and you're more vulnerable then. You're not only vulnerable to being targeted by somebody, but you also then don't know what's happening to your community, and they're more vulnerable because they're now alone and your group isn't fragmented. And, our collectively pushing back against state repression is really the only thing that's ever helped, right? Either in having small gains against state repression, or even in building community and easing some of the pain of what communities have to go through together. So if that's all that we have, we can't stop doing that. It's the only thing that has ever worked in pushing back against state power. And it's really also about the collective organizing, the collective struggle is the way that we always have to go. Because staying home is not going to get the state to stop what they're doing, right? They're not going to wake up and have a conscience tomorrow. It's up to us to really push that, right, and publicly shame the states and what they're doing to our communities. So I want to close with just a few resources that I find very valuable in a lot of the sort of documenting and fleshing out more the Know Your Rights stuff I talk about. One is it's a YouTube channel and a website called Flex Your Rights. The YouTube channel is great video tutorials showing you what you can do in different scenarios when people interact with law enforcement, whether it's on the street or in the car or whatnot. And that's a really great resource to see this stuff play out. And then the Center for Constitutional Rights has a booklet called If an Agent Knocks, and it's available for free download in many different languages on their website. It goes a lot into these home visits and sort of the larger state repression of communities and using undercovers and whatnot. And it's an excellent resource. There are many other Know Your Rights booklets online. Also, Palestine Legal does incredible work in fighting with students to push back against suppression of their speech on campuses, on their political speech, and them doing this organizing and this publicly speaking out in public. Political organizing. So they are an incredible resource to reach out to as well, and to support. And of course also just, your fellow community radical lawyer, you can always contact me. You can contact me through the U.S. campaign. Also, you can email me. My email address is Bina Ahmad, ESQ, @gmail.com. So BinaAhmadESQ @gmail.com. There's so much else I could tell you that I would love to go over, but I feel like I'm going to bore you guys to death. So thank you all so much for what you're doing, for trusting me, and for us standing in solidarity with each other. It's kept me going through the years, and I can't do this work alone, and I don't think any of us can. And I think we're all stronger together. So with that, thank you all so much, and I will see you in the streets.